Welcome everyone to the Wabam Experience. My name is Landon Beall. I'm the editor-in-chief of WabamEntertainment.com. Joining me today is the one and only Michael Thomas. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
A little tired. We were recording this in the morning, so, I haven't had my cup of coffee just yet. But aside from that, doing pretty good. And very hyped on the new Dune movie by Denis Villeneuve.
Good job with the pronunciation there. People always say Dennis. I hear Villanueva, and it's just like, oof.
Hi, this movie's directed by Denis Villanueva.
But yeah, you came to play with that pronunciation there. First attempt. Appreciate it.
Lots of practice. But yeah, so this movie, we can just kind of freeform this, but I have been hyped for this movie before it was announced. So they've had so many attempts to try and make Dune, and the Jodorowsky version kind of failed, and the David Lynch version kind of failed, even though it was made. The miniseries on Sci-Fi, decent, but super low budget and doesn't really feel like Dune. And several years back, they tried another attempt that also failed. They wrote a screenplay for it and just never filmed it. And here comes Legendary and Warner Brothers, getting this crew together to make this version of Dune, and they knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I think that again goes back to the director, Denis Villeneuve, and just how great he is. I think we need to just step back and appreciate how we have this guy who's done legendary work already. I mean, Sicario, Blade Runner 2049 is one of my favorite movies of all time. Arrival is one of my favorite movies of all time. So to have somebody of that caliber be a legitimate fan of Dune, the source material, like he loves the book anyway, and he wants to make a trilogy from the Dune series. It was always kind of destined to be a huge success, to be a masterpiece, if you will, because the person behind it, creating it, is a visionary who also loves the product. So I always had faith that the movie would be good, but I'm still blown away that it was this good,
Oh, yeah. Like, I knew it would be fine. And I loved Arrival. Arrival is one of those movies that blows my mind with how clever and smart it is. I love Prisoners. I rewatched Prisoners actually while my wife and I were carving pumpkins because you need a scary movie in the background, and it might be a thriller, but man, is it intense. And Blade Runner 2049, of course, it wasn't a successful movie at the box office, but I like it better than the original Blade Runner.
Venom 2 is a successful movie at the box office, so that is not an indication of quality.
Not really, yeah. Money is not always a indicator of quality. And you see that with Denis' work. He goes where the story and the camera takes him. And that creates some genuinely amazing films. And Dune just, from the very first second of the movie, it opens with this chant about dreams. And everybody, in the theater just kind of stopped, because I think it took everybody off guard. And
it catches you so off guard because the Warner Brothers logo was right after that. It's like, wait, was that the movie or what was happening?
Well, and somebody else pointed out, is this some prescient vision that's, you know, being portrayed before the beginning of the movie? Is this, uh, some kind of opening chant? We don't really know, and the movie doesn't explain it, and that is a-okay, because it kind of sets the stage for how the entire movie brings you into that world.
Yeah.
This is a movie that gives you the info you need, and it does not overload you with the lore of the book. Like even that scene on Caladan when the Herald of the Change arrives.
Mm-hmm.
The movie doesn't explain the Spacing Guild. It doesn't explain Chum. It doesn't explain House Carino and the Padishah Emperor. It just says all these things exist. And it shows it to you in that scene, and it expects you to accept it. And I love that. I love that so much.
It simplifies it in a way, because like Dune, for those of you guys who haven't read the book, Dune is a like very lore heavy book. And Denny just kind of scales it all back to where you can just have it happen organically, which I think is the best way to go about it. For example, like Star Wars, you don't learn about midichlorians until way down in the series. You just know how the Force works, right? Or have an idea of how the Force works. That's the same thing that happens here, and even like with the power of the voice, they introduce that, and it's just like you just have to accept it, like you've been saying, Landon. It's just it makes the world feel worth exploring. Like if you get everything served to you through exposition, it's not always that interesting, but it's like, what is the voice? Who are the Bene Gesserits? What is this power that Paul possesses? And what is his future going to look like, you know?
Yeah, and that's really the trajectory this movie takes. Since it is a part one, they're splitting the novel into two, which is a smart move. The novel is very dense, and as much as I love 3-hour movies, I don't know that I could sit through a 6-hour movie of Dune.
Look, we sat through the Snyder Cut. We can survive anything.
I did sit through the Snyder Cut, but it was with lots of pauses. And I loved it. I loved it. Don't get me wrong, but lots of pauses, man. But this movie follows the trajectory of Paul learning who he is and making a choice about who he's going to become. And the movie starts with that. It opens with the opening scene of the Fremen, and Zendaya's Chani is giving this overview of their oppressors on Arrakis, and asks, who will our next oppressors be? And the very next scene is this kid asleep in his bed. And if you've read the book, then you understand what the implications of that are. But as a visual, it's perfect for a movie because you don't have that information yet. It's a setup, it's a mystery, and now you got to find out what this kid.
It's a great use of visual storytelling because you cut straight to Paul asleep in his bed, but it also invokes other fantasy, like sci-fi tropes, right? We find the hero asleep quite often. Like all season premieres of Avatar: The Last Airbender start with Aang asleep and he wakes up. Same thing happens with Link in a couple of the Zelda games. So it's just kind of funny seeing the protagonist asleep, and then once he wakes up, we follow him on his journey. But the setups in this movie are subtle, but they're incredible. Like I like how we're using Paul's dreams too to set up the narrative of the film. Like we see palm trees burning in like the first 20 minutes of the movie, and it ties back into the end of the second act of the film once they get to Arrakis.
Yeah.
And dude, that's the kind of stuff I love, because when you rewatch it and you are able to, well, one, like watching it on HBO Max, I watched it a second time from home, being able to pause and be like, oh, dang, this is a scene later in the movie, seeing it play or seeing it play out slightly differently than he envisioned it, really makes this a fun movie to explore and keep re-exploring.
It is. And you brought up the visions. The way that they use Paul's visions is very clever. And the David Lynch movie tried to kind of do some of that with voiceovers, but it didn't really get there. This movie really emphasizes the weight of what the spice is doing to his mind. And the scene in the tent with Jessica is so wonderful. That's not in the book. It's kind of a truncated version of a scene that is in the book. But it has this moment where he just becomes so overwhelmed. He's seeing the horrors of his future.
It's one of those. It's my favorite moment, at least regarding Paul in the entire movie. Besides, of course, the what's in the box scene, which is just done to perfection. One of my complaints, and this could also, I guess, just be a complaint of the book Dune, is Paul is kind of a boring protagonist or MC, main character. Because in this movie, a lot of it is revolving the dreams and the mystery behind them. But when you scale it back to Paul himself, I don't think I really got the emotion or understood how Paul was feeling in this movie, aside from this one scene, which is why it's incredible. And it's one of the few times we see that Paul's not enjoying these dreams. He's not really enjoying this chosen one role that he's basically has been thrust upon him. So, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, the whole chosen role or chosen one role. The aspects of that are really clever when you get into it, because Dune is really the story of a dark messiah. It's a chosen one character that does not play the normal chosen one tropes. People have argued this for years. Is Paul Atreides a white savior character? No. No, because he is a villain protagonist. Not in this first movie, and not really until the end of the first book. But his choices are those kind of an anti-hero.
Yeah. And that's why the second part 2, the second movie, it's going to be really interesting. One, to see how audiences kind of accept what happens in that film, but also just kind of building off of, again, that issue I had with this film, where it's like every other character in this particular movie I found way more interesting than Paul Atreides. Duncan Idaho, Duke Leto, Lady Jessica, all the Harkonnens, everybody, all of the Fremen, I found more interesting than Paul Atreides, which might be intentional to kind of build that character up over time, kind of like a Anakin Skywalker type of deal. But yeah, can we just talk about Rebecca Ferguson in this movie? Because was that an Oscar-worthy performance to you? Because I think she was incredible.
I feel like there's multiple Oscar-worthy performances in this film, and Rebecca Ferguson's is up there. Somebody else pointed out that they actually cast the character her age, and it did not strike me until I was in the theater how smart that was, because this is a character who, I guess Jessica could be younger or could be older, but it really works because Rebecca Ferguson is playing her age. And so you get the nuance, you get the wisdom of years, and you get kind of the agony of having to watch her family go through what they're going through.
Yeah, for sure. To me, she carried this movie. She was the most interesting. That was the same way for the book for me, honestly, with the character of Lady Jessica. Is that dynamic isn't something we see often in these types of stories, right? Like the mother-son dynamic isn't something that is really touched upon. At best, you might get father-son, but usually in a sci-fi or fantasy story, it's an orphan or the parents are no longer in the picture, blah, blah, blah. We've seen that time and time again throughout fantasy and sci-fi. So just having a mother have a central role in the story. And again, a lot of it kind of falls on her shoulders. We see early in the film about how she did decide to have a son and the ramifications of that with her and the rest of the Bene Gesserit. So again, much like the book, I feel that her character is the most interesting at this point in the story. And so I think she just killed it. And yeah, casting somebody her age really just kind of elevated the role and made it more believable too.
100%. And the character in the book of Lady Jessica, the book, and I'm sure we'll see more of this in part 2. The book does a really good job of contrasting who Lady Jessica is and who Chani is. We don't get that in the movie because Chani is only in the movie for what, like 10 minutes, 15 minutes? Not really a long period of time to get to know who her character is.
Let's be real, Zendaya looks like she was in a perfume commercial for 90% of the movie.
But it's kind of smart because Paul keeps having these prescient dreams of her, and she's like this dark angel character with a knife, and then he meets her and she's a badass. That just goes to show that you can't trust your dreams always. You will either be disappointed or completely overwhelmed, and in this case, probably completely overwhelmed, because I love that part where he goes up on the rock and she sneaks up behind him and was basically telling him if he'd taken the shot, she would have killed him.
Yeah, that was, but you see, that was the perfect reveal for that character, because again, they filmed her like she was in a perfume commercial, just on this desert, looking gorgeous as ever. But then it's like when like you said, reality sets in. It's just like, oh dang, she was about to kill this dude, and it's like that's they could have had this majestic reveal for the character, but they didn't. They didn't go there, and it's like that's subverting your expectation, and it plays into the mystery of like, okay, who is Chani really? Why did Paul keep dreaming of her? Especially since Paul doesn't mention that right away, well, at all in this part. Yeah. It's going to come up later, obviously, but it's just like you just kind of left with questions, not questions as in you're dissatisfied with the film, but it's leaving you wanting more, and in a way that's more interesting than a random post-credit scene, you know? No disrespect to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but the movie ends at a kind of an awkward point, but it's not a straight up cliffhanger. So that's probably the best way Denny could have gone about it, because Dune is a beefy book, and there's no way you could cut that thing in half without it being a little jank towards the end.
No, but I like how they did it, because they frame the entire arc of Paul based on that scene with Paul and Leto. And we were talking about how the movie is basically a mother-son film.
Mm-hmm.
But we still get that father-son moment on Caladan before they leave, and Duke Leto is talking with Paul about what it means to be a leader, and regardless of his choices, all he ever wants him to be is his son. Um,
That
and
was
the,
such a great moment too, by the way. Like Oscar Isaac is phenomenal.
Oscar Isaac is the best version of Duke Leto. I will go on record and say that. Not just as acting, but I would say he's even better than the book character, because the book character is very contemplative. But you don't really get that sense of his relation to others. You know, people respect him, but you don't get that nuance that you get in a situation like uh, this, where his character gets to be present. His character, you get to see the actions of other people around him and how they respect him. So it's not just everybody respects him, but you really get to see it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just clever. It's clever all around.
That again, though, the world feels lived in, and in a lot of fantasy or sci-fi stories, you don't really get that sense. It's one of the things I know. I did not expect to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender twice in this podcast. I'm sorry, but you're talking to me. That's gonna happen. In the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the lore is established that 100 years have already passed since the Avatar has gone missing, and so when you see the world, things are already in place, things are already in motion, and you're discovering it with Aang. That's kind of happening here, where the world is already set, but now you're seeing the changes and the shifts through the eyes of Paul, and it's like his father is already important and respected, but you're also seeing how they're handling this current situation of being moved to Arrakis, and that's really important, because if your world doesn't feel believable, it just takes you out of the story. And seeing that these characters already have relationships, but being able to understand their relationships once you meet them, like you meet, for example, Duncan and Paul, they already have a certain bond, and you don't have to know why they're friends, but you get it. And that applies to like everything you said with Duke Leto.
Yeah, you get that sense of he has been in this world, and it's not just that people respect him, it's that he gives people a reason to respect him because he respects them.
Yeah.
And you just don't usually see that in these leadership characters. But the movie actually goes out of its way to put this whole new scene that's not in the book between Leto and Stilgar.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just basically telling, hey, you know, we want nothing more than peace with you guys. We'll leave you alone. Let's be friends. And Gurney Halleck is just freaking out. He thinks everything that Stilgar does is rude, and they're having to basically constrain him.
It's perfect because it establishes that was the because after I first watched it, it's like, how do we know who we're rooting for in this movie? That goes back to me being distracted at the movie theater. Sometimes crowds aren't a good thing, people. But that scene by itself is like, this is why you're rooting for House Atreides, at least at this point in the story, right? Because the Duke wants nothing but peace. He's like, hey, we're forced to be here, but we don't want to have any conflict with you guys. And he's doing everything he can to make sure everybody comes out a winner. And Oscar Isaac plays that perfectly, honestly, because his performance, he has that regal nature to him where you get the sense that people should respect him, right? Like sometimes characters who are in these leadership roles don't have that presence on film to where you can believe that, yeah, this guy is a duke and he's leading everybody on Caladan. He's the one who's going to take charge here. But Oscar Isaac has that presence, that stage presence, and his conversations with Gurney and Paul and Jessica just kind of add on and build up on that.
It does, and it even makes his eventual demise even more tragic.
Yeah.
That entire scene with the Baron, you get the weight of how old this conflict is between these two houses, House Harkonnen and House Atreides. And it's sad and it's heartbreaking. And that also happens around the time of the tent scene, which kind of adds to the intensity of that too.
Yeah, for sure. That scene was heartbreaking because they set up he's like, it'll be your last breath, but it'll also be, I'm forgetting the name, the guy and the Harkonnens.
The Baron.
Yeah, the Baron. It's like, it'll also be the Baron's last breath. And it's like, dang. It's like, well, at least because I was watching this at home with my family. They know nothing about Dune. And so when this moment happens, they're like, well, at least he took out the Baron. And then you see the Baron again, and they were just like, oh my God. So his death was also in vain. That is tragic.
It is.
And it is. It's awful. Not everybody's going to go out like a hero unless you're Jason Momoa.
We'll come back to Jason Momoa in just a sec. The Baron, it's funny, in the book, he does not get injured from the attack.
Yeah.
He does in the book, or excuse me, in the movie. He does in the movie. And I think that's smart because it does show his weakness. Mm-hmm. He is not all powerful. He just happens to be very rich and very what's the word I'm trying to find here? He's opulent. He is very vain. That's the word I was looking for. Vain. He's very vain, very powerful and very vain, but he is not, immortal, and he is definitely not immune to the effects of a poison.
Yeah, that was, like you said, really smart addition. Not just for Leto's character, but yeah, for the Baron's character as well, because you need to establish weakness and just kind of establish the rules of the universe, because if he would have survived that, it's like, well, if he can survive poison, is he a god? Yeah. Without injury, that kind of makes things a little more grounded, I would say.
Yeah, the only thing in this universe that hurts gods is water, but you'll find that out later. In like a movie 5.
Movie 5, good grief.
Yeah. But Jason Momoa, oh my gosh.
So I might be the only one who's going to say this. I don't know. But I think this is Jason Momoa's best performance by far. Yeah. Because it's the most believable for me. Like, in Game of Thrones, he's kind of over the top and kind of one-dimensional, at least to me. In Aquaman, I don't buy Aquaman. I'm just going to be real. I'm not a fan of his version of Aquaman, his take on Aquaman. I think he plays it well, but I just never bought into it through the 2 Justice League films. Well, the Snyder Cut was a little bit better, and the Aquaman film. But here it's just like, I loved his performance as Duncan. Again, the world feels lived in, so Duncan feels like a character we already know, even though we technically know nothing about him. And that's what I love so much about the world building in this film. Is like, they don't, like he said earlier, they don't hold your hand. They don't have to over-explain everything. And we don't need narration saying, Duncan Idaho was such and such. We just meet him. He's charismatic. You fall in love with him. And he has the best fight scene in the entire film.
Well, and it's interesting because Duncan Idaho in the book he's just vanilla and kind of boring. His character doesn't become more important for this saga until later on. But in the initial book, he's kind of there. He's the swords master, and his fate is exactly the same as it plays out in the movie. So casting someone with the kind of charisma that Jason Momoa has, and just like you said, adding scenes where you can see that he has a relationship with the people around him. Smart, smart, smart. And it really, I think, plays well for audiences too, because the book Dune is so dense. It is not for everyone, and I begrudgingly have to recognize that it's not a book for everyone. The movie, though, this is Denis Villeneuve's most crowd-friendly movie by a long shot. And it is in part because of the casting, because that's like my mother-in-law. The only reason she wanted to see Dune was Jason Momoa. My father-in-law, he was all very happy about it because he knows the book. My wife was not interested at all until we told her, okay, these characters are in it. Jason Momoa's in it. You want to see it? She was finally like, okay. And guess what? All three of them loved it.
Yeah, we never actually talked about that. I want to know, because you said that your wife wasn't interested, so she actually did enjoy it after seeing it.
Yeah, so Victoria enjoyed the movie after she saw it. Now, she wasn't just a big fan. She wasn't a big fan of it like she is of the Marvel movies. Mm-hmm. But she still enjoyed it. And after the fact, she was asking questions. She was like, okay, so what about this? What about this? And so we were explaining it to her because she was invested in it.
Yeah.
And, that is probably the most triumphant accomplishment of this version, is that it's a version of Dune you can actually be invested in.
This is the only version of Dune I've seen on screen. I read the book, but I didn't bother watching any of the movies or the miniseries about it, so I have no frame of reference to how bad those other adaptations were. But yeah, I think that's a testament to the film not holding your hand, but also him simplifying it enough where you can follow it. Because the people I watched with, they still had questions about it because they couldn't really interpret Paul's dreams correctly. They weren't quite sure what was happening until you see him inhaling the spice, and they're like, okay, we get it. And so the film, but again, the film kind of worked that part out to where they eventually figured it out, which, like you said, is a testament to if you can piece it together by the end of the movie, they did a great job.
Yeah. And I have seen the other versions. I've not watched all the miniseries because they made 2 of them. But the parts I have seen are atrocious, and the costume design is even more atrocious. The David Lynch movie is wonderful from a visual standpoint. It's very aged at this point, but it got the visuals right for its time. Mm-hmm. The script and the acting is much to be desired.
I haven't seen the movie, but from the looks of it, because they adapted the book in its entirety, so did it feel rushed and
very
how
rushed?
Did that work?
They cut entire sections of the plot, and they give greater weight to entire sections of the plot that really in the book is like 1 chapter. And it tries so hard to explain everything. This movie does not do that, and it's so much better for it. And kind of going back to what we said about Momoa, I agree. I think this is his best work. And not that I disliked the Snyder Cut. I loved it. Not that I disliked Aquaman. I did enjoy that movie. I enjoyed his performance more in the Aquaman movie. But this is way better because he's not trying to be, a fun, lovable comic book character. He's trying to be a nuanced person.
He was able to actually flex his acting chops a little bit. And it's like he's still that badass fighting character that you would expect from Jason Momoa. But like you said, yeah, the nuance is there where he feels like a person. And that's something I didn't quite get from his other role, his other popular mainstream roles. He's probably had some smaller work that I haven't seen. Not trying to discredit him like that there. But yeah, that's what I loved about this film, is that it has big names, but it's putting them in good roles, and the director, as good as he is taking advantage of what their talents are. Like Josh Brolin, he has that booming Thanos voice, right? That's pretty much iconic at this point. But in the role of Gurney, he's again just another guy. Honestly, he's still a strong guy, which is what you come to expect from somebody like Josh Brolin, like Jason Momoa. But there's still nuance there. He's still three-dimensional, and that is a testament to the director. That's also to the screenplay, the script. Honestly, giving them enough meat. We keep talking about the scene that was added with Leto, but Duncan and Gurney are in that scene, and they both have highlight moments in that interaction as well, which just adds to all three of their characters.
3 of my favorite scenes in this movie all have Gurney Halleck in it. And I love the scene when they arrive on Arrakis and they are met with the fanfare of bagpipes, which we're 8,000 years in the future and they're still playing bagpipes. That's amazing.
Did Bagpipe Man escape? That's really what I want to know. That's what I need to see in part 2, is if he's still there with bagpipes.
I'm gonna hope so. The Fremen need some more chance in the sequel. But they arrive on Arrakis, pomp and circumstance, full dress uniform, and Gurney is on the platform of the ship reading a Orange Catholic Bible, which, if you are not familiar with the book, it was never mentioned once in the movie. If you are familiar with the book and you know what that is, and as soon as you see it in his hands, you just had that moment of, oh my gosh! Which I totally did. I thought it was clever. It added just a little spice, so to speak, to the world.
You said the thing.
I did say the thing. I said it. But it was a wonderful scene. And the other 2 scenes I really love with him in it were actually the training scene with Paul. Mm-hmm. That training scene sets up a lot of lore organically. It sets up the Harkonnens and how brutal they are. And you see Gurney's face is scarred from them. You get shields explained to you. And you also get a brilliant setup for part 2. And there's this whole scene where, at the beginning of that, where Paul's turned around and Gurney walks in and tells him that don't have your back to the door, someone could come in. He's like, I know your footsteps, old man. And he's like, somebody could mimic my footsteps. And Paul's like, I would know him anywhere. Well, then you have the scene with the Spice Harvester. And that scene is amazing. Everybody saw it in the trailers, but it's even better in the movie. A wonderful achievement in filmmaking. But
it is. It's beautiful.
It's gorgeous. It's incredible. But you get that scene where Paul is he's breathing in the spice. He's having a prescient vision while the sandworm's about to consume him. And they rush over to try and pick him up with the ornithopter, which the ornithopters, I could have an entire hour-long podcast about how amazing those are. But In that scene, Paul says, "I hear your footsteps, old man," and then Gurney grabs him. But if you've read the book, this again goes back to why I was having so many nerd moments. In the book, Shai Hulud, the sandworm, they also call him the old man of the desert. So while he's having these prescient visions, he's having some kind of prescient moment with the sandworm. And the movie doesn't take time to explain that. It just is put there so that if you've read the book, you know exactly what's going on.
But it's also in a way where if you haven't, you just like, oh, because Gurney showed up.
Because Gurney. But it has a double meaning.
Right.
It's not only Gurney, but he's talking about the worm right beneath his feet. And as soon as I heard him say it, I was like, oh man, this is just genius.
So, I've been saying this, and you can challenge me on this if you want. I've been saying that to make movies like this, the directors and the writers already have to be a fan of the source material, which is how you get moments like that, right? Where it's nuanced and it has those double meanings, and the eagle-eyed fans will get it. The casual audience might not get it in its entirety, but they're not lost. And I got a lot of flack for that because, that I would say that about various other properties, Superman, Spider-Man, Star Wars. But I think this right here is the very reason why I come to that conclusion, because if you don't care about Dune and you don't put the time in to develop that world and to have those character moments, those character beats, to have, because again, it's a story about the future and the past and dreams. So you kind of need to start layering that stuff in. Do you think anybody besides Denis Villeneuve would have been able to pull this movie off? Because considering how big of a fan he is of Dune, I think taking somebody like Christopher Nolan, just hypothetically saying he doesn't like Dune, would he have been able to do it justice?
I think that you could have possibly replaced Villeneuve and had a decent Dune movie. Mm-hmm. Could have even been one that we were ranting and raving about how good it was. But I think the passion that Villeneuve has makes me not even want to consider what another version would be like.
Yeah, like that's a timeline I don't want to be in. And so, but that's why it's like film is passion projects, honestly. Like when you're mandated to say, hey, you have to make a third Ant-Man and the Wasp movie, if Peyton Reed doesn't want to do it, it probably won't have the passion behind it and the care behind it. Hypothetically, Peyton Reed might want to make another Ant-Man movie. I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, I mean, we almost got a Peter Berg Dune movie. I don't want to live in that timeline. I'm glad I don't live in that timeline. I'm glad we live in this timeline where we got what will be known as the definitive version.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about character details and just like the overall story and the layers that they were adding. I want to just take a second, if we could pivot for a minute, the technical aspect of this movie. This film, Landon, it's incredible because I can't tell where the CG is. Yeah. And in an era of, I'm not trying to keep dunking on the MCU, but it's like in an era of where you can kind of tell that they're using a green screen, you were just fully immersed in this movie. Because like you were talking about the Thopters, all of the technology, all of the aircrafts feel like they're there and they feel real. And in some of my favorite movies, like in Star Wars, sometimes those ships don't feel like they're real. And it's like, just this movie is gorgeous. I love everything from the ships, the suits, the sandworm. It's just from a technical aspect, it's so immersive because everything's believable. And you don't realize how rare that is until you get a movie like Dune.
Right. Uh, I mean, there is maybe one moment in the entire movie where you see the CGI and you know it's CGI. And that's not to say that, you know, there's not clear moments where if you stop and think about it, you know that it was made in a computer. But even the sandworm, like the way that the sandworm moves looks like a real creature. It does not look like somebody crafted this in a computer. It looks like somebody went out and filmed some elephants walking around. And it's smartly done. The entire movie's done that way. The ornithopters look real because they are real. Like they built those and had physical versions on set.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they look real. The only thing that is not, I guess, would be the blades moving.
Yeah.
But because everything else looks real, they look real. And that style of filmmaking, it's like it's been forgotten.
It has, and I think it's because again, that's why I was saying it being basically a passion project, right? His love child, essentially. He made sure they took the time and did it right. Whereas, you know, a Black Widow movie has to be pumped out because Scarlett Johansson doesn't want to do this character for much longer. Fans wanted a Black Widow movie. Let's pump out a Black Widow movie. And so it didn't get the care. It didn't get enough time to basically bake in the oven. And so it's kind of underdone. And so some scenes look janky. And that happens. The story can be fine, but some action scenes might not be as sharp or as crisp as they could have been because Marvel's mass producing these out. Whereas Dune, if it took Denny 5 years to make Dune, he was going to take his 5 years, and now he's got the groundwork already laid to make the sequels faster.
Yep.
And that like you said, that style of filmmaking seems like it's been lost because if you can do it with CGI, it's going to be cheaper and faster to do it with CGI. And so it feels like a lot of studios are just like, do it quickly and get it out the way instead of taking the time to build a set. Like, why? Again, not trying to dunk on Marvel, but Spider-Man Far From Home, when Nick Fury, quote unquote, Nick Fury is in Peter Parker's hotel room, why is that scene CGI? You know, why couldn't we just film that in a hotel room or build a small set that looks like a hotel room?
Yep.
And it feels like a lot of studios and directors are like, it's faster to just do it in post. We get the movie out faster if we do it in post. But Dune, that's why people are saying it's a masterpiece. And it's a callback to the days of The Lord of the Rings because we're doing it practically and enhancing it with CGI, which makes the blend way easier, way smoother, way more believable. But also, like the sandworms, like you were saying, that was another old school technique, and it's reminiscent of Jaws. We don't see the sandworms really until that final shot with Paul and Jessica running away from it. You get glimpses, but it kind of builds that fear and builds that anticipation throughout the film, and that alone made that reveal that much better.
I love the scene where Liet Kynes basically goes Leroy Jenkins. That brought me so much joy. That's not in the book. That's not how Liet Kynes meets their end. But it was a wonderful way to do it in the movie.
It was earned. It made the death feel earned, though, because especially because like my sister was watching it and she was just like, she sees her grab like the grapples and she's like, what is she doing? Is she gonna try and ride the worm? You get really excited because you think you're about to see her do something crazy, and then she dies. But then the end of the movie still pays it off because you see people riding the sandworm.
Yep. Yep. I mean, that technically was what was going to happen, but as soon as she realizes what's up, change of plans.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a smart way to do it. The book, in the book, I mean, I'll just spoil this for anyone who hasn't read it. Leah Kynes has a very sad and uneventful death because that character, which is male in the book, um, is an ecologist. So an ecologist is going to care more about the care of the environment they're in.
Yeah.
And if you know anything about Dune, one of the inspirations for Dune before Frank Herbert wrote it was ecology. So it's very deeply woven into the story, just like everything else. And Leah Kynes' death in the book being centered on the ecology is uneventful, but putting it this way in the movie gives you that chance to show Leah Kynes being a part of the world's ecology, not so much just observing it like in the book.
It also shows that it was basically a sacrifice because that Thopter only set 2. And so it's like she had a plan to get away, but it was way more dangerous than going with Paul and Jessica. And so it feels like she knew that and she gave that up in the same way that Duncan did just a few minutes earlier.
Right.
Also, I love the misdirect with Duncan's death because Paul is trying to go with him because he knows he's going to die once they get to Arrakis, but he doesn't die right away. And so that kind of subverts Paul's dream. And as the audience, I found that most people seem to forgot that he was supposed to die until the door closes. And then the entire theater just gasps. And it's just like, oh crap, this is the moment, isn't it?
Well, and the movie plays it so well. Like he goes total badass on the Sardaukar,
Yeah.
and you think he's gonna live, even though they knock him down. And then he still dies, and then it's even more heartbreaking because, he went out swinging,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes back again to Jason Momoa because he has a certain physicality about him, and when he can use that and not just look good in a costume like Aquaman, when he actually gets to use that physicality for a purpose, it feels more important in a way. Like it adds something to that character.
Yeah. Not trying to keep dunking on Aquaman, but this is what I would have wanted to see from that take on the character instead of like the surfer bro.
Dunking on an Aquaman is what we do best here at Wabam.
Explosions every 5 seconds.
Here comes a big wave. This movie does have a lot of explosions, but they're all explosions that make you sad.
That is the weight of the film, though. And that's, again, just good storytelling. Because it's amazing to me how people walk out of this movie and say it's boring. Because it's like every explosion was for a purpose. It wasn't just happening because we need an action scene to happen. It was basically an act of war or retaliation or self-defense.
This movie has an entire Pearl Harbor in Act 2. What are they talking about boring?
Yeah, it feels like they just couldn't follow the plot. I think like maybe the talk of the houses and all that stuff lulled them to sleep, and they didn't appreciate the action moments when they happened. Because like when the attack happens, and you see them wake up Gurney, and you see him basically like unprompted having to lead the military into battle. That is tense and terrifying. And you again, hopefully Bagpipe Man escaped. but it's just like you don't know what's going to happen. You're just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Where is this going to go? Who's going to survive? Because do we see Gurney after that scene? So we don't even know if he survived it.
We don't see him after that scene, and I will not spoil the rest of the book for those who have not read it.
Yeah. But again, that's what makes that scene tense and dramatic. And then you cut to Duncan barely getting out by himself, basically scaring dudes away from a thopter, which is another great moment of them just saying, "Take it, man. We're not fighting."
Yep.
And he flies away.
It's again wonderful acting on his part. I feel like I could spend an hour talking about every single actor in the movie. There's several I've not even mentioned. Like I've not even mentioned the Mentats. I've not mentioned Dr. Yue. There are so many. Oh, the Reverend Mother. There's so many cogs in this movie, and they're all wonderful. There's not bad acting anywhere in the film.
No, not at all.
And I think even with an unlimited budget, they couldn't have nailed this cast any better. And the entire film as a whole was just a wonderful achievement. It makes me happy to be alive in 2020 2.0.
It's everything I love about filmmaking, honestly, because everything's clicking. Like the script is tight, the characters are great, the actors are doing great with the roles they're given. The cinematography is gorgeous. The CGI isn't noticeable, which is the best you can hope for when it comes to CGI. But then you have all of that with Hans Zimmer's score, which is just on a whole other level. It's my favorite score of his, I think, because you don't notice it really, which again, like CGI, for a score, that's actually really good, where you're so immersed in the scene, you don't really pay attention to the score. Sometimes him and John Williams, they're so loud and flashy, you can't help but pay attention to it. But this is a little more subdued. It still hits you with great moments, but I feel like this is the best accompaniment to a film he's ever had, aside from like The Lion King, honestly.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I have failed to mention Hans Zimmer to this point, but
there's so much to talk about. You're okay.
I texted Michael after the movie and said, if Hans Zimmer doesn't win the Oscar for this role, he'll be robbed.
Yeah.
Because this is his best score, in my opinion. And that's saying something, because Hans Zimmer's done so many iconic scores. The Lion King, The Dark Knight, Inception, Interstellar. He even did the Amazing Spider-Man films. He did Driving Miss Daisy. Hans Zimmer gets around with his scores.
I feel like he scores every movie.
He did Man of Steel. He did the Wonder Woman theme. His stuff is iconic. And here we are with the Dune soundtrack, and he just pulled off something incredible here. He made you feel like you were in the year 10,191.
Mm-hmm.
And it just blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind how well he pulled it off.
Yeah, it's a testament to everything in this film, which is why it's one of the best movies made in recent memory. Because like I was saying earlier, everything is clicking to the point where we're an hour into this conversation and we didn't even mention the score until now, and we were saying it's Hans Zimmer's best. I feel like that means the movie's doing really well.
Honestly, this film could win a bunch of Oscars. I don't know if it will. I think it would be a huge crime if Villeneuve was not nominated for Best Director.
Mhm.
And it would be an absolute crime if Hans Zimmer does not win for his score. It'll be nominated for costume design. Rebecca Ferguson may be nominated, possibly. There's a lot of potential for this film at the Oscars. And any of them that it wins, I feel like it's very deserving of. Because it is such an achievement. And you hear that thrown around like, oh, this is the greatest ever, or this is an achievement in filmmaking, but this is actually a filmmaking achievement.
This is why I hate that people throw around terms like masterpiece. Because let's be real, like Captain America: The Winter Soldier is not a masterpiece, but people will call it that because it's one of the best MCU movies. And I love that film. I really do. It's one of my favorite movies. But we use those terms too loosely.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens in sports too, where it's like LeBron's the GOAT, Michael Jordan's the GOAT, Tom Brady's the GOAT. And it's just like, how can everybody be the greatest of all time? It feels like the term GOAT has lost all meaning.
Yeah, it doesn't hold the same meaning. There are athletes and there are actors and there are filmmakers, politicians. There are people who do meet the criteria of what we would consider greatness.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, as much as I love Villeneuve's other movies, they do not compare to this one on the scale of what he did.
Yeah.
They're great films. And before this, I would have said Blade Runner 2049 is a masterpiece. It's a masterpiece in a different kind of way. This is a film that will be remembered the same way that Lawrence of Arabia is remembered.
Yeah. It's why I want to see part 2 and part 3, because it'll be in the same breath as Lord of the Rings as far as trilogies go. Like just an epic, beyond normal proportions. It's gonna be an epic, which is why I'm glad we recorded this conversation a little after release, so we can all breathe and be happy that part 2 is coming, instead of recording this being like, well, hopefully part 2 is a thing.
I'm over the moon that part 2 is happening. I have tempered expectations for part 3 if they get it made, knowing what that story is. But even if we do get part 3, I think it's going to be amazing after I've seen this one. If they give it the same love, care, and attention, it'll be well worth the admission price.
For sure. What do you want to see in part 2? I know you know what happens in the part 2 of the story, but do you want to see them like set up a part 3 or just like finish the second half of Dune?
I absolutely want them to set up part 3. I would love to see little bits and pieces that set up future parts.
Yeah.
I kind of want to see Villeneuve go for it and just show us a prescient vision of the God Emperor. I want it so bad. It's probably not going to happen, but it would be incredible if it did. And what I want to see the most in part 2 is I want to see the downtime. There's a lot of downtime in that back half of the book, because the first half, you're not getting to breathe. Like, they're packing up to leave Caladan, and they're getting to Arrakis, and it is boots on the ground, run, because of this feud with the Harkonnens. Part 2 of the book, you have a significant portion of the back half where it's just the Fremen chilling. And I think that's going to be great, because you're going to get to develop Paul and Chani. You're going to get to develop Paul and Stilgar. That's an interesting relationship. And also, in the movie, you saw this scene where Jessica had her baby. Uh, if you've read the book, you know what that's for. In the movie, that's going to be incredible.
Mm-hmm.
That entire scene is going to be incredible. And it sets up a lot going forward. Now, probably the other big thing in part 2 that I'm curious to see is who are they going to cast as the Emperor? Because the Emperor in the book, I'll be honest, he's a pushover. He's kind of a lightweight who's more afraid of the other houses than someone who actually flexes his own political muscle.
Yeah.
In the movie, the fact that they don't show him and the fact that they show everything he's doing and the consequences makes him way scarier.
It has to be Ian McDiarmid, right?
I mean, that would be kind of cool, actually, but I kind of want to see them get somebody who, I don't know, like maybe late middle age,
Mm-hmm.
like older than Oscar Isaac, but not quite Ian McDiarmid.
Do it.
Do it. Like a Donald Sutherland type, maybe, would be really, really creepy.
That would actually be really great, but he's way older than Ian McDiarmid.
He also played President Snow in The Hunger Games, and he nailed that. And I'm very happy with that performance. So I think someone else with the same qualities would be really good.
Mm-hmm.
Because he has those qualities where in his acting, he is very good at letting you understand that he can have ulterior motives and machinations in everything he does. And the book version of that character does not really get that deep into who he is. The David Lynch movie doesn't get that deep into who he is. He's kind of a pushover in that movie. And the fact that they've set him up in this one to be as conniving and deadly as he is just going to make that reveal even more amazing when they finally reveal who is playing the Emperor.
Yeah, they can also just like touch up the actor with makeup too, because I mean, Stellan Skarsgård looks nothing like the Baron, but he killed it. Honestly.
Oh yeah. What would be funny is if they did something like cast Jared Leto. That sounds like something Villeneuve would do. And Jared Leto's just an interesting actor anyways. So it'd be funny if they did it, but I don't really want to see that.
I mean, now that you mentioned it, Christian Bale would be really good too.
Oh,
man. To go a little younger.
Oh man, actually, Christian Bale would probably be perfect. Now that you say that, now I need it. I need it. You could do. Oh, you know what you could do that would be interesting? Tyler Perry.
You know, you've been on this Tyler Perry kick for a few years now. You really want to get him in one of these major roles, don't you?
Well, I had this idea ever since I had the idea of Tyler Perry as Darkseid. I just need to see Tyler Perry in this villain role. Because most people think of Tyler Perry as Medea, but dude's got a lot of nuance.
The Medea thing's more his fault than anything, honestly.
It really is. It's the lane he chose, and I respect him for it. But I would love nothing more than to see him get a role that's like a Darkseid, like a Padishah Emperor. That'd be pretty. Cool. That'd be pretty cool if it was Tyler Perry. It won't be Tyler Perry, but it would be cool.
It'd be interesting for sure. Like you know, he's got the chops to do it. It might take me a minute to adjust to see Tyler Perry in such a dramatic role.
Yeah, I would probably be expecting him to bring in a chainsaw and cut a couch in half if it was Tyler Perry. But
oh jeez.
Yeah, whoever plays the Emperor is going to intrigue me a lot about this second part.
But yeah, that's the thing, and it's funny because again, people who aren't familiar with the book Dune, they talk about the Emperor, but yeah, like you said, they don't show him. And by the end of it, nobody seems to have been asking who is the Emperor, what does he look like, what's his deal. It's just you kind of accept that he's not in the picture just yet, which I think is interesting, seeing how the general audience perceives things compared to somebody who's familiar with the source material, because nobody cares about the Emperor right now. That'll be a big deal later, but the movie didn't give them a reason to question who he is or what his motives are.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just really intriguing. I've never been the person to have the knowledge behind this stuff like Lord of the Rings. I watched the movies before reading the books. So it's just really interesting seeing how the GA processes the movie differently than book readers.
Yeah, and I was the same. I did not read Lord of the Rings before watching the movies. And I was very, very invested in those, in the way that they played out. But a lot of their setup, you start to see it play out by part 2.
Yeah.
Or really kind of the end of part 1. This one doesn't set up much more beyond part 1. It sets up a little bit with Jessica. It sets up a little bit with Chani. I love the prescient vision Paul has where he's friends with Jamis, who he kills in this movie, and that's a huge dramatic beat. But in the book, he has this line, and he says to the Fremen, I was a friend of Jamis. And that line was always kind of weird in the book because, Jamis wanted to kill him. Mm-hmm. So how can you be friends? Well, this movie gives a logical reason for him saying that. And has this prescient vision of a future where him and Jamis are friends. And he's like his right-hand man. And that's just brilliant storytelling. Whoever took the time to think of that and put it in the movie, this goes right back to what we were talking about of how much love and care was put into this.
Yeah.
You have to be a fan to even think of something like that.
Yeah, because I'm going to be real. I've read Dune. I love Dune. I don't think I would have thought to do that. Honestly, like, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense, and it works. It's going to be great at future-proofing your story, but I'm going to be real. I wouldn't have thought of that. So you know that they took a lot of time to craft a moment like that, and it's just really awesome.
As much as I love Dune, and I do, that book is one of the top 5 best books I've ever read. And I would have never thought of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they did still just blows my mind. I mean, if I had to put a star rating on this movie, I'm giving it 5 stars because of the level of detail it takes. But I don't really feel like you can rate this one in stars because it's not asking you to judge it based on the quality of the story. It's asking you to judge it based on the quality of the product.
I usually don't give stars to movies at all. That's why when John and I would record, we would basically just be like, it's good, it's bad. Because stars never tell the full story, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree.
So I don't know if you're on Letterboxd, but people probably saw Dune fluctuate so much on my Letterboxd because I was trying to figure out what star rating to put on there. Because my list, I'm ranking my favorite movies of the year, so I had to give it a rating.
Mm-hmm.
And Dune started out at 5 stars. Then it went down to 3 stars. Then it went to 4 stars. And it's like, on a technical level, it's a 5-star film. On a story level, I don't think it's quite 5 stars because it's half of the book. And so for me, it feels a little incomplete. So I can't give it a full 5 stars. And so it's like I eventually settled on 4.5. I felt like that was a decent compromise. But it's like star ratings are stupid because you look at, like, I'll just share some of the films on here. A Quiet Place is 4.5 stars. The Green Knight is 4 stars. But also, My Hero Academia World Heroes Mission is 4 stars. And My Hero Academia is nowhere near Dune. You know, but it's half a star below Dune because what you want from a My Hero Academia movie, it checked just about all of those boxes. And so this is why star ratings are flawed, because they're technically close in score, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, My Hero Academia 3 is on the same level as Denis Villeneuve's masterpiece, magnum opus, Dune.
I much prefer, I over the last several months even, I've started to much prefer tier ranking of films because it lets you put a film into a certain class or tier of what it's like without really judging the quality. And this, if this was a tier ranking, I think you would probably agree that Dune would be an S rank.
Yeah, but Dune would be S tier, and it would probably be alone in S tier. But if you were to look at my best films of the year, it's currently number 5, which is why rankings are weird and they don't make sense.
Yeah, as with all things, your mileage may vary. Judge a product based on its merits and based on your own enjoyment. Not everyone's going to enjoy this movie, and that's okay. I'm fine with that because everybody's different. Everybody has different tastes.
Yeah. Also, not to go on a tangent, but it also kind of makes me understand Rotten Tomatoes a lot more, considering it's just an aggregate of X amount of people liked the movie, therefore it gets a fresh rating or a rotten rating, which all the complaints about Rotten Tomatoes can be valid, but it's like at least it's simplified to where it's like somebody giving it a 5 star and somebody giving it a 2.5 star. It'll still count it as positive because technically those scores are positive, as opposed to saying, oh, people hated the movie because they all gave it 2.5 stars. It's like, well, 2.5 stars is a positive rating. Yeah. That makes sense.
And you get on Rotten Tomatoes, as frustrating as Rotten Tomatoes can be to me, you do get, it's basically thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you like it? Do you not? And then it's the aggregate score of how many thumbs up or how many thumbs down it got.
I think the problem comes from people misinterpreting what the score tomato meter is supposed to be. And that's probably Rotten Tomatoes' fault for just not making that clear.
Yeah, as of this recording, everybody's freaking out about Eternals having the lowest score of any Marvel movie. But for all I know, it's the best Marvel movie ever made because of that score. I don't know until I see it.
It's the most interesting because people actually have varying opinions, which is nice for once.
Oh, yeah. This is how I felt about the Netflix Death Note movie. I realize I'm in the minority in loving that film, but I love that film. Like, I would sit down any day and just watch that movie because of how much I enjoyed it. And I realize nobody else of the fan base seems to love it. That's cool. I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about stories in general, is they're not always for everybody. But if you find something you enjoy in it and you love it, cool. Embrace it, watch it. There's nothing wrong with being a fan of Hallmark movies, and there's nothing wrong with being a fan of big blockbusters like Dune. They can all be quality.
That's so weird for you to say Dune is a big blockbuster, because it is, but it also feels very intimate in scope because it's about basically like 3 families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the perfect balance. And I think that's why we need more stories like Dune, where you can still have that grand, epic adventure, but in reality, it's a feud between three households. In all honesty,
it is exactly like all the classic tales that involve three houses. Uh, Romeo and Juliet is a story of three houses at war. Well, two technically, but the third one is kind of the intermediate. Uh, Same with this. There's a lot of classic tales that follow this idea. And in our modern day and time, we don't really think about it too much because of the way our modern politics are set up and social media. But even if you just watch the way people behave, oh, somebody wronged my meemaw, and now I'm mad at them. So these types of feuds are still prevalent even today, so they're relatable.
yeah.
The movie and the book too are very careful about how the feud between the Harkonnens and the Atreides is so ancient. It's almost like they've forgotten why they're at war with each other. That's sad too.
Yeah.
But it makes the story even more human.
And yeah, that's well said, and you can't really say that. Don't really have anything to follow that up with, really. But it's like, yeah, that's exactly what makes Dune great. That's what makes this movie great, because it's epic in scope, it's intimate in storytelling, and that balance is, like you said, it's what makes the greats. The Lord of the Rings is a trek to drop a ring in a volcano, but it is one of the greatest adventures ever written. And Dune is in a very similar vein, honestly. Yeah. And that's why I can't wait for part 2, because that is going to be fun. And I just love Denny's enthusiasm when talking about part 2, because seeing how much he's excited for part 2 and seeing what he did with part 1 makes me even more hyped for Dune part 2.
I agree. And I feel like this is a great place to end this conversation. We're not going to have a perfect ending, just like part 1 doesn't end on a perfect ending, so to speak. but let us know what you thought of Dune. We're on Twitter at WabamENT. We're also on Facebook at WabamENT. And our website. Oh, that's true. Yes, we're on Meta.
Aside from Dune, this is the dumbest timeline.
It kind of is, yeah. Welcome to the timeline where Facebook has to change their name. Yeah. Like I said, it's 2020 2.0.
Facts.
But yeah, we're pretty much everywhere. We're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. We're on our website at wabamentertainment.com. And Michael, where can we find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Novice Cinephile on Twitter and YouTube. I'm also on Instagram at The Novice Cinephile if you want to go there. Novice Cinephile was taken by an account that has no pictures. I hate when that happens. But on the YouTube channel, I'm also doing reactions to Fooly Cooley, doing reviews and video essays. For the Amateur Otaku, I'm also reviewing My Hero Academia, the manga, the movie, and the spinoff with Leo Rydell, Isaac Wolf, and Brandon Alvarado. Also, I'm writing for Collider.com and Wabam Entertainment. I should have a review for My Hero Academia World Heroes Mission on Wabam Entertainment soon, so make sure you check that out at wabamentertainment.com. And Collider, I'm writing stuff daily there as well, so you can just check out collider.com.
Sweet. And you can also find me on Twitter. I'm at the Bellman. That's spelled Beall because my ancestors couldn't spell. And you can also find me on YouTube at Storybake. I'm also on Instagram at StorybakeHQ. And you can generally find me around the rest of the internet.
One more thing I forgot to mention. I'm also a part of this group, this collective group called the Otakuverse, where once a month we get together and talk all things in the world of anime, whether that be Attack on Titan, Naruto, Dragon Ball Evolution. That was a conversation. So make sure you check those out. But we get together once a month over at youtube.com/geeklygoods. That's Leo Rydell's channel. Check that out. But for the month of November, we are talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender and if it should be considered an anime. So make sure you check that episode out as well. That should be a fun conversation.
That's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother donut.
I get it. Knives Out season, baby.
Yeah. That's also a whole nother donut. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We will see you next time here at the Wabam Experience, and have a wonderful day, evening, or night where you are.
Peace.
Missed.